All right, welcome everyone to Stalking Awareness Month. This is a full day of programming put on by NC State's Women's Center. My name is Carlin Wright-Eakes. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Interpersonal Violence Prevention Education Coordinator with the Women's Center, and I will be the moderator of this session today. All of the workshops that we have today are for students, faculty, and staff in order to raise awareness of stalking behaviors, the impact that stalking can have on survivors, as well as highlight campus resources that serve as supports for students who may experience stalking. This is an especially important topic right now. College students are especially vulnerable to stalking. And the COVID-19 lockdown has also made stalking a lot easier in a variety of ways, including increased online presence from stay-at-home orders can make it a lot easier to track a survivor's whereabouts. In addition, many of the resources for survivors have moved virtual, so it can be even harder to access if you don't have reliable technology or Wi-Fi. So we're really excited to have some of our campus partners here with us today to talk about what they do and how they support survivors. We'll have them introduce themselves a little bit later once we get started. I would like for everybody who is with us today, if you are willing, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, pronouns, role on campus. I'm really happy to have you all here. So today we have an hour and a half together. We will start with the opening, go through a few norms, these introductions. We're going to do a quick poll on what is stalking, and then we will get into resources from Violence Prevention and Threat Management, OIED, and Student Legal Services. Really grateful for our partners to be here with us today. And our hope for this hour and a half together is that we'll develop a greater understanding of what stalking is and how it impacts college students, really know how to access specific tools that we can use if stalking occurs, recognize supports available through NC State University in response to stalking, as well as understanding options for legal action in response to stalking. So we're hoping that participants are able to locate resources both on and off campus. And we've got some of the introductions already happening in the chats. We'll continue with those. And before we get started today, I want to take a moment to honor the land that North Carolina State University was built on, and that it is land that was originally stewarded by two indigenous tribes, the Tuscarora and the Catawba. Because we're virtual, I know not everybody is at NC State or in the Raleigh area. So I invite you all to recognize the land that you call home or where you are located today. If you are not sure, there's a number that you can text your zip code to the number in the chat, and that will tell you the native land that you are on. So where I reside is the Ino Okanichi. And we hope that by honoring the legacy of these native lands, that we'll continue to remember the history of this land, deepen our work to break the cycle of colonization and oppression. And we acknowledge the history of all these spaces that we occupy and the places that we occupy in order to understand our collective history and unlearn many of the harmful ways that we've been socialized. And we do this in order to prevent any future harm and erasure. And we'll take a moment for people to go ahead and populate in the chat the land that you are on. All right, we'll continue. We also want to recognize that stalking, which is our topic of today, but any form of IPV as well, can happen to anybody regardless of their gender identity, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, abilities, socioeconomic class, or geographic location. We also know that stalking can be perpetrated by anyone regardless of any of these identities. So as we're learning more about stalking today, we hope that that this work will challenge all stereotypes and all systems of oppression. So we know that violence does not happen in a vacuum and all systems of oppression are interwoven. When we learn about stalking and responding to those who are experiencing trauma, many of the same principles that we'll talk about today apply for supporting loved ones who are experiencing or have experienced other forms of violence that can be caused by sexism, racism, homophobia, or any other form of oppression. Since we are virtual today, we want to go over a few Zoom ABCs and XYZs. This is mostly a presentation, so there won't be as much engagement, but we do hope that you all continue to engage in the chat as we go through this presentation. Make sure to mute yourself. Feel free to turn off your video if it's easier to listen or if you're multitasking. Again, utilize the chat. You can message all participants. You can also respond directly to any of the hosts if you have a private question. By participating in this workshop, you are agreeing to act respectfully and adhere to the agreements that we will outline for the space. And we reserve the right to remove disruptive participants or individuals who are not participating in ways that honor our community purpose. So some virtual community agreements for this space. Speak and chat with respect. So if you are engaging in the chat, use I statements to make sure that you are speaking from your own experience. Actively listen and have an open mind, and try to listen to understand. We won't have as much discussion, so be present, be aware. Be aware of your privileges and mindful of others' experiences. Be intentional with your words and actions. Come from a place of learning and having an open mind, and be present by not multitasking during the training if you're able to do so. Stories stay, lessons leave. So we want to respect everyone's privacy, recognizing that if any individual story is shared in the chat, just making sure that these are not things that we repeat. We do want you to take away any lessons that you learn and share those with others. And it's also important to know that our presenters, as well as staff from the Women's Center, that we are responsible employees, so we are not confidential. That means if somebody shares an experience of interpersonal violence, it's our responsibility to continue to connect you with resources through NC State, so through the Equal Opportunity or the Title IX office. Challenge yourself, so lean into anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or that challenges your comfort zone. If you find that you're feeling uncomfortable, really ask yourself why. So be brave and allow yourself to learn something new. And last but not least, take care of yourself. So some of this content may be heavy or upsetting. We ask you that you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Feel free to turn off your video if you need to, move around, step away, and also recognize that there are lots of resources here. If you do need to speak with somebody, you can message anybody from the Women's Center privately, or you can also reach out to the Counseling Center or the Women's Center helpline. And those resources will be dropped in the chat. So we are going to start off today with a quick poll about stalking, just to see how much everybody here knows. Again, this poll is anonymous, so feel free to answer to your best ability. So the first is the National Center for Victims of Crime estimates that 2 million people are stalked every year in the United States. Agree, disagree, or unsure. Number 2, young people ages 18 to 24 are the most likely to experience stalking. 13% of women report being stalked while in college, and 25% of women age 18 to 24 have been stalked online. Members of the LGBTQIA+ community are less likely to experience stalking. Stalking can be linked to intimate partner violence or interpersonal violence and sexual assault. Some victims of stalking change their daily routine to avoid their stalker. Victims of stalking are usually stalked for a short period of time. College students are less likely than the general public to report stalking. People who experience stalking suffer higher rates of mental illness than the general population. And most stalkers are unknown to the victim. So we'll give you all another minute just to kind of fill in your responses. And then we'll see what we know. All right. So number one, the National Center for Victims of Crime estimates that 2 million people are stalked every year in the US. This is actually not true. It is estimated that 6.6 million people are stalked every year in the United States. So it's even higher. Young people aged 18 to 24 are most likely to experience stalking. We have 100% saying agree, and that is correct. Next, 13% of women report being stalked while in college, and 25% of women age 18 to 24 have been stalked. That is also correct. Members of the LGBTQIA+ community are less likely to experience stalking. This is incorrect. The LGBTQIA community faces heightened risks of stalking, especially for trans or non-binary identified individuals. The statistics say that 15 to 20% of trans individuals are stalking survivors. Stalking can be linked to intimate partner violence and sexual assault. We have 100% saying agree. This is correct. Victims of stalking change their daily routines to avoid their stalkers. This is also true. So especially on a college campus, we know that some victim survivors feel that it's necessary to drop classes, move residences, quit their job, many different things to protect themselves. Victims of stalking are usually stalked for a short period of time. This is not true. 11% of victims are stalked for 5 years or more. College students are less likely than the general public to report stalking. This is actually true. College students are less likely than the general public to report stalking. And we can talk a little bit more throughout this presentation on why that might be. People who experience stalking suffer higher rates of mental illness than the general public. This is true. So stalking victims and survivors are more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, PTSD, sleep disorders, and any other things that can really impact day-to-day life. Most stalkers are unknown to the victim. This is false. 80% of victim survivors know their stalkers in some way. So y'all did great. You have a lot of the information already. So thanks for doing that poll with us. So now we're going to move into hearing from our guest speakers today. They're going to be talking a lot about what stalking is and ways to respond, from safety planning to the university response to legal actions. And our first speaker today is going to be Krista Morris-Lehman from Violence Prevention and Risk Management. Hand it over to Krista.
Thanks. So as Carlin said, I'm Krista. I use she, her pronouns. I am the assistant director in the Office of Risk Assessment. Specifically, I work with violence prevention and threat management. And we work pretty closely with the Women's Center and OIED and Student Legal on cases that involve stalking. Next slide, please. So I'm sure a lot of you already have kind of a general idea of what stalking is, but just kind of the information we use is that it's behavior that's meant to harass, intimidate, or terrorize. And we use that word terrorize because that's what a lot of people use when they come to us and say what's been happening in their day-to-day life. So I know that's kind of a scary word, but I think it's an appropriate word as well for a lot of people. It's engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for safety or others. So if you feel like this is worrying you, bothering you, listen to that. It also causes substantial emotional distress for people. Next slide. So this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but these are some of the ones that we see in our office when we're working with survivors of stalking. So one would be unwanted communication. This is the number one thing we see, and that can be in person, text, emails, direct messages on social media. some form that person does not want to communicate with the other person anymore. Following or spying. So sometimes we'll hear, I looked over and I think I saw this person looking at me from far away. That would kind of be spying, that you're not, in person and out in public about that. Obviously following, hopefully people know what that is. You turn around and somebody's there. Leaving unwanted items, presents, or flowers. People will come back to a res hall or their office and somebody's left them a note or flowers, a gift. Sometimes they're very, kind of intimate gifts that you would give, more of a type of somebody you're in a relationship with. Making threats. And again, this can be everything from I'm going to get you expelled to I'm going to kill you. It can be threats of violence or harm. Or it can be, I'm going to tell your parents that, we had sex. So some sort of threatening type of verbal behavior. Posting information or spreading rumors. And this is obviously with the pandemic, most of us are at home. People have time on their hands. So we're starting to see this a little bit more, things online. The person will primarily stalk the other person online somehow. So again, posting information that's not true, spreading rumors with social media, I could go online right now and say something that's not true. So this is something that we've kind of seen an uptick in as well. Property damage, destroying property either in somebody's office, at home, in a classroom, being violent near somebody. So if I was in my office and I threw my phone, that would still be, a form of, violent behavior or property damage. Defaming character, like I mentioned, saying things that aren't true, making up lies, rumors, kind of bullying behavior. We see that sometimes as well. And cyber stalking. This is one, obviously, in the last year we've seen really grow because people are online primarily and we're not meeting face to face for the most part. Next slide. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but just some ways that you can help if you have a friend or loved one who's going through this right now. Have people around the victim know what's happening. If your roommate's being stalked, talk about it. Tell people that you trust and confidentially can tell that this is going on. So for example, I'll use myself as an example. If I was being stalked, I would probably tell my coworkers in a confidential manner, so if they saw a person or saw something that didn't look quite right, that they could alert me or we could alert the right authorities that I felt comfortable talking to. Give clear instructions not to initiate any contact and tell them what they should do if the stalker makes contact with them. So this is pretty common. So say I'm being stalked, but somebody goes to my best friend or my roommate or a colleague or coworker to try to get information, or they might start communicating with me. So it's good when you feel comfortable to have that, conversation with friends and loved ones so they can help you and support you as well. You can also give the information regarding the stalker's vehicles. Some stalkers will drive around or, you'll see their car parked. So that's another important piece, and provide a picture. That can be very helpful because especially on a big campus, if it's happening on campus, when we're back from the pandemic, 40, 50,000 people on campus on some days. So if I say somebody's kind of tall with brown hair, that doesn't help. So when you do have a picture, that can be really helpful. I saw someone posted in the chat that renter's insurance does not cover property damage and vandalism, and unfortunately that is true. You can always check with your insurance agent, but unfortunately some of those don't cover certain things that we wish they would. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, the big current trend we're seeing is that a lot of this has moved completely online. It might be happening in a chat on a Zoom meeting or in class. A lot of stuff is going on social media, Facebook, Instagram, things like that. So I'm curious kind of what our trends will look like when we're back. But right now, I can't say exclusively, but most of the concerning behavior we're seeing is happening online and through texting. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about safety planning. I know we kind of throw that word around, but people don't know exactly what it means. So this is something that our office does. And I just want to stress that if you or you have a friend or loved one that's going through this type of concern, this is something we can help you with. You can contact me or the other two people in my office, which are Dr. Tina Nelson-Moss and Sarah Furman. And this is something that we can tailor specifically for your needs. So if you're only being stalked online, we're obviously going to talk about general safety, but we're really going to focus on, how do you keep yourself safe on social media and through online platforms. So this is really meant to be a holistic look at your life and your unique situation. And we, as I mentioned, we tailor this directly to whatever you're going through. And also, I just want you to know, we don't force people to make choices. We don't say you have to get a protective order or you have to do a no contact order. We really present you with your options and your resources so you can make an informed decision. Just as a heads up, just like the Women's Center is, we are all responsible employees in my office. So we do get to work with OIED, and we, obviously will talk through when we meet with somebody, we talk about confidentiality and privacy and kind of what our responsibilities are. But I do want to give you a heads up there for those of you who do work with our office. Next slide. So again, this is just some general safety planning. And I tell people I use a lot of these just in my day-to-day. I grew up in a small town where people kept their doors unlocked and didn't lock their cars and kept their keys in their cars. So I have had to kind of, change my ways as I've gotten older and maybe a little bit more savvy. But these are things that we all really can do regardless of the situation we're in. So if you are being stalked, obviously you can change your daily routines. I am a creature of habit. If you need to find me, I could tell you, most people would be able to tell you when I'm at the gym. I go the same 3 days every week, pretty much the same time. I go to the grocery store at the same time. I'm a creature of habits, and a lot of us are. Obviously, with class schedules, work schedules, some of those errands, and kind of extracurricular things, we can vary. You could go to a different gym if it's a chain. You could go to the grocery store at a different time or go to a different grocery store. So think about kind of what your daily and weekly routine looks like. If you're always at the same place at the same time, think about ways to vary that. Know the location of the closest police station. Obviously on NC State's campus, that's over in the admin buildings, is the actual police station. Think about the routes you travel. Where could you go if you needed to have a safe place? I always tell people, like Witherspoon and Tally, student health, those are always pretty heavily trafficked areas, the library. So if you are concerned and walking by yourself, or you kind of need to think about, where are some safe places I could go on campus? For example, our office is in Broughton Hall. It's kind of hard to find, but somebody's pretty much always there on the 4th floor as well, if somebody would need, some help. You can think about self-defense training. For some people, that's very empowering to do self-defense. Let people know where you're going and how long you'll be. I do that in my daily life. If I go up to Costco, I let my husband know when I'm going to be back. And so simple things like that, sometimes we forget, can be really meaningful, just to let somebody know where you're at. Join an auto club with roadside assistance so that you can call for assistance if you have a flat tire or your car's been tampered with. Screen your calls. I tell people you don't have to pick up your phone. You don't have to answer texts. You don't have to answer the door if somebody comes to your door. So you can screen those. Obviously, people can spoof numbers and come up with new numbers. But if you don't know a number, I always think if someone really needs to talk to me, they'll leave a voicemail. Keep a list of critical telephone numbers, including emergency services. So on campus, that might be the Women's Center, our office, counseling, the police. Police have a non-emergency number. Keep that where either on your phone. I have those in my phone because I obviously can't remember everybody's phone numbers. Some people put them on speed dial or in their emergency contacts. You can unlist your landline if you still have one of those. I know a lot of us don't. It used to be really easy to find people. You just got this phone book and you looked and you could find people's addresses and phone numbers. Some of that's still out there. If you Google your name, if you Google my name, you can see pretty much everywhere I've lived since I was 18. So we'll talk a little bit more about kind of online stuff here in a bit, but you can unlist your numbers and some of your contact information. If you're at NC State, you can restrict your directory information as well, and that goes through the registrar's office. Again, ensure that telephone calls and visitors are screened at work. So for example, at where I work, I could ask our admin, hey, if you see this person or if anybody comes to see me, would you just give me a call first? So that's an easy thing you can do with roommates, with coworkers, with classmates. Again, avoid walking alone at night or in quiet remote areas. Walk with a buddy. NC State has escort services if you need escorted to your car, to another building. Even during daylight hours, you can request that. Um, get a personal alarm. We have panic buttons in our office. Other people I know literally have a little personal alarm, um, that they have that makes them feel a little bit more safe. There's a ton of apps and other things out there as well. The school I was at before had an app where you could let somebody know, hey, I'm walking to the library, I'll be there in 15 minutes. And if you didn't check in again, it would contact your person. So let's go to the next slide. Additional safety planning. And again, when we work with people, we're doing individualized safety plans. So everybody's looks a little bit different. So what I'm telling you today is just kind of general, what we tell most people, and that we do kind of in our daily lives too. You can check your car before you get in. I know growing up, that was always kind of put in my head, if that's a concern. Some people like to turn off the location services on their mobiles and cell phones as well. If you have children, you can inform the school or daycare centers that your children attend to the situation. I worked at a daycare in college a long time ago, and we had several parents who had protective orders or there were custody agreements. So it was really important for us to know what was going on, so we didn't send the child home with somebody that they shouldn't be with. Carry the cell phone with you. Make sure it's charged. Cell phones are great. For that, again, if you have those numbers programmed in, people that you can call, including resources. Have the cell phone with you when you're at home. Keep it by your bedside table if you're sleeping or going into another room. Think of a safety plan about how you can exit your home quickly and having a safe place to go. Have people that you can talk to, that can support you, that you can call at a moment's notice and that can help you out and that know about your situation. Next slide. So again, we could talk about tech safety for days and days and days, just because there's so much out there. And if this is something that people have kind of an interest in, we do some additional trainings on this through our office. So again, cell phones are great, internet's great, but it also has some concerns as well. So use a safe device. Some people do have concerns that people have tampered with their device. So some people will get kind of a throwaway flip phone if you need to do that. Trust your instincts. I tell people that all the time. Trust your gut, trust your instincts. Something doesn't seem right. If someone doesn't seem, right or safe, trust, that inner voice that you have. Look for patterns. Document things. This is very important. When we have people, we do like a stalking harassment log. You can find those online. You can make your own, just to kind of document all of the information that you have, the text, the phone calls, the emails. It could really come in handy when you're working with campus partners or if you decide to work with law enforcement. Change all your passwords, your usernames, your security questions. A lot of those security questions are really easy. I joke with my kids, what's your mother's maiden name? Well, my maiden name is in my name. So it's a little bit easier to find that. So think about some of your security questions. Some of them have gotten really good that literally nobody but you or maybe one other person would know. But especially if you've had like a partner, my husband knows the name of the street I lived on, and he knows my elementary school and things like that. So think about that too. That's one thing I think a lot of people don't realize, is that their security questions are actually pretty easy. Check your settings. You can turn off location settings, as I mentioned. Protect your personal information. There are services online that can kind of scrub the internet. Like I said, if you Google me, you'll find out all the places I've lived. So there are places there that will do that for not a lot of money, if that's something that's concerning for you as well. Protect your personal information. You don't need to give it out to everybody. And I usually, like I said, I do a Google search of myself every once in a while, and then you can contact people directly if there's information that you don't want. I will just be honest, the tech safety website is really good. It is an undertaking, especially if you're older than 2025, because the longer you live, the more information that's out there, the more you move, the more jobs you have. If you Google me, for example, you'll figure out pretty much every place I've worked. And that's not something I necessarily want on the web, but because I've worked for public public places, it's easy to find me. I've worked for state institutions. So you can ask your employer if you don't want that on there. Some people I know don't put, if you go to the VPTM website, all of our pictures are there, all our names, our phone numbers. If that's something that, you don't feel comfortable with, you could talk to your supervisor about as well. Let's see, stalking log, as I mentioned as well, is another option. And if that's something that anybody wants, I'm sure the Women's Center or our office can provide you one if that's something, if you want to start tracking things a little bit more closely. I could do a whole presentation on online dating safety, and I don't have time to do that obviously today, but really think about, what you want to share. I hear a lot from students, male and female identified, that they feel pressured to give their real names, their ages, where they live, where they go to school. And obviously with a few pieces of information, somebody can find you pretty easily. So some people use their middle names, or they just use a makeup name. They use initials. They don't use all their identifying information. They might just say, yes, I'm in college, but they don't say where. So some of that is thinking about, especially in those beginning phases, how you present yourself and what you want to share. And obviously, if somebody's pressuring you right away to share a lot of personal or intimate information, that might not be, maybe you got to trust your instincts and your gut on that. Again, this is something that if you're concerned about, that you could talk to somebody in our office, because we really could do a whole presentation just on dating safety. Talk to your friends, ask them, say, hey, this person said this to me. What do you think about that? So I think there's a lot of different options in terms of dating safety. The one thing I try to stress is meeting people in public. And a lot of times those quick, coffee or lunch meetings are a good thing. And you usually tell somebody where you're going as well, that I'm going on a coffee date with this person, and this is what I know about them, and I should be back in an hour, and then check in afterwards. So again, I don't have the time today to go into some of those like I'd like, but just kind of to keep some things up in the forefront of your mind. If you have a concern, if you want to connect with our office, the easiest way is to do our Go link. And you can go there. You can call or email me or the other two people in our office as well. Janine's put our information in the chat. So we're absolutely happy to have a conversation. We do a lot of safety planning pretty much every week, sometimes every day, with people. We also work with employees. I just want people to know that as well. If you're an employee, we can help you out as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Krista, for sharing all of that information. And again, for everybody here, we will share Krista's information and our other speakers towards the end, as well as in the chat. Our next speaker is Dr. David Elrod with Equal Opportunity and Equity in the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity.
Thanks, Carlin. My name is David Elrod. I do serve as the Associate Vice Provost over Equal Opportunity and Equity. We have a staff of about 6 individuals that help navigate through several of these conversations throughout time. We also offer, in certain situations about investigations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on as we navigate through. One of the aspects as it relates to stalking is that certain aspects of it may fall under a Title IX realm. And so as we look at the next slide, I'd like to just to make sure that I identify that our Title IX coordinator is our Vice Provost for Institutional Equity and Diversity, Sherry Schwab. She's the one who helps coordinate our efforts in addressing and reducing incidents of Title IX, and then addressing situations as they come up, even as it relates to additional supportive measures. As we look at the next slide about reporting, I do want to just put it at the end of my conversation today, but I want to put it at the very beginning. And Krista had kind of shared a little bit about it. The quick link is listed there as report a concern. It does have information related to reporting a concern, and we have some flow charts that are up there to help navigate through so that people can kind of see on the front side what that looks like. But anybody can call our office and just kind of process through, if someone were to report, what does that look like? What can they expect and stuff of that nature. If they share that information with a responsible employee or designated official, throughout the university, those individuals have a requirement to share all of the information that they that are shared with them. They have a requirement to share that with our office. When that happens, we're going to reach out to the impacted party to see if they would like to engage with us in a conversation. However, if anybody wants to, contact us and you're not exactly sure who to contact, we do have a general office email that is listed there at equal opportunity at ncsu.edu. And then that's our phone number that is, even though we're working remotely for the majority of the time, someone is still operating that phone line. Before we get into looking at the specifics of the policy, on the next slide, you'll see that there's several policies that are at play depending on who impacted parties are and who respondents or individuals who are alleged to have engaged in certain behaviors are. All three of these policies are at play if a respondent or the person who's engaging in the activity, if they're a student, all three of these policies may be applicable in that conversation. If the person who's alleged to engage in this behavior is an employee of some sort, so faculty or staff, the only thing that changes is that the Code of Student Conduct comes out, but we still have policies that address that. And so just kind of a nuance there. I just want to make sure that, we've tried to work very diligently in order to make sure that the policy language aligns. So I want to talk a little bit about what that policy looks like. And so the next slide talks about our new Title IX sexual harassment policy. And so I want to, it has a very specific definition of stalking coming up, but everything that is focused around the stalking also is covered under sexual harassment. And so here you'll see that there's several elements as it relates to Title IX sexual harassment. And although I don't have a specific slide on the non-Title IX sexual harassment, I'll tell you the biggest difference as it relates to this one is, from bullet number 1, it talks about the quid pro quo harassment, this for that. If you do this, then I'll do that. If you won't do this, I won't do that. If you don't do this, I'll do that. And if you do this, I won't do that. That's the, kind of 4 scenarios there. That's where that number 1 comes into play. But this number 2 one under Title IX, talks about the incident has to be severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. So it has to be all 3 of these. When we look at stalking, oftentimes based off of the definition of stalking, that these may already apply, right? Depending on what's happening. However, there may be some incidents where something is not severe, but something is pervasive, right? And if it's an or statement, it doesn't fall under our Title IX sexual harassment, but it would fall under our discrimination harassment policy, which states severe or pervasive. And so the university does address that. We were required to put in a specific definition of stalking under VAWA, which is listed on the next slide, which kind of reiterates what Chris has already talked about related to the definition. So here it says that the stalking means engaging in a course of conduct that's directed at a specific person, that would cause a reasonable person to either fear for their own safety or the safety of others, or suffer substantial distress. There's another policy, I said that the Code of Student Conduct also applies in this scenario. And so I'm going to put in the chat for everyone the Code of Student Conduct definition. It falls under, so we still have the Title IX stalking definition, which falls under there. And although this isn't listed as a heading of stalking, it does fall under our interpersonal violence under their 10.14b section, which specifically states that if someone's engaging in a course of conduct directed at a person, such that the relationship or the context of that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or the safety of others. So you'll see that mirroring language, that it's also covered under the student conduct. So when you look at the Code of Student Conduct, one thing may use the actual term of stalking, but the other one that's under Title IX. But non-Title IX stalking is also covered, and here's that definition for that. So I just want to make sure that was clarified to let you know that we've tried to be very intentional on the university level to not be caught up in like legal or linguistic loopholes, that we're trying to do what's right for our students, our faculty, and our staff. When incidents of interpersonal violence or stalking occurs, there are some options for supportive measures. And so as we look at what some of those may look like, it comes in a lot of different ways. Krista has already talked about some of those as it relates to safety planning, and you'll see that in the third bullet here, it's a non-exhaustive list. However, whether it be connecting individuals to resources for like counseling, some modifications to deadlines, whether from an academic standpoint or from a work standpoint. There are some, leeways that we have as it relates to like absences or some class, facilitation pieces. And one of the things I would talk to individuals about, and our Women's Center does a great job when they're engaging with survivors of this situation, to be able to they don't have to use this specific language, but if they're talking about something, the Women's Center, and it may be something we have never thought about before or has never come up because of the way that the university continues to change. If something comes up, if you ask about it and if they inquire about it, it's always a no unless we ask. And so there may be some things that come out of those conversations that we engage with other administrators upon other departments to be able to say, hey, is this a possibility that this can be done? One of the questions that Gina, you put in there is about, are they retroactive? I think we look at everything as a case-by-case basis to see whether or not it is something that we can do, or is that's applicable in that situation. So I wouldn't say that it's not retroactive. I would think that we would look at every aspect to see, is there a possibility? So for example, we have, if a student is withdrawing from a course and the course date the withdrawal date is passed, right? But we were kind of navigating through some pieces, or it wasn't reported until after the drop date, but we have documentation or we have some things that support kind of the situation. We can actually work through university processes to work on potentially backdating a withdrawal or a drop, right? So there's some pieces as to what that looks like. Not necessarily. Some of the information, based off of the way that we interact, this is to follow up on Gina's question about documentation. Some of that is that when I use the term documentation, some of it is I get information from the Women's Center. My documentation is maybe an email from them based off of some of the conversation. So I have to have some documentation, but that doesn't mean that a survivor of a situation has to produce some actual tangible documentation. So thanks for that clarification. In looking at some additional supportive resources, the next slide shows our Safe at State page. If you go to this page, it has, again, non-exhaustive list, and we continue to try to add things to this list for individuals. They can go there and they can look up resources that are available. Some of our campus resources involve, and it varies. Again, there's more obviously campus resources geared towards student focused pieces, because that's where we're getting some of those resources out through fees, through different implementations. The other aspect for employees, however, are some things from the HR side. So you see the human resources, employee relations, those are internal to university HR. FASAP is an assistance program for employees that helps connect to counseling services and legal services outside of the university, right? So that they have a confidential way to share information or to get resources. Pam's coming up here shortly. Hers is student legal services, so it's really geared towards the student side of things, but we want to make sure that we have resources for employees as well. And so this is a way that we can connect that. Our other resources that are campus-wide, regardless, you'll see are listed there. And we also provide resources in a variety of ways regarding off-campus resources as well. I wanted to take a moment to also describe and at least kind of bring to the table what happens after we get a report, or what that looks like through our process. And so the next 3 slides kind of is really kind of a general rule of that. And so for the Title IX process, the first part is that we would receive a report. And if we don't have the information, it's hard for us to work with individuals because we don't know yet. But once we know, whether from a designated official, a responsible employee, or by an impacted party that shares the information, or even by a witness of an impacted party, we can really start to kind of navigate through that. That, for us in equal opportunity equity, that may involve an intake. However, there are some times, again, I'll lean on the Women's Center, when we have some of these conversations, is there may be some times that our staff in the Women's Center are meeting with individuals and they inquire about whether or not the impacted party wants to receive a correspondence from us. If not, then we may not be reaching out because we want to respect those wishes. But if they want to hear from us, then we'll reach out to them and talk with them through the processes and additional supportive measures and things that may be afforded to them or rights that are afforded to them, because we just want to make sure that they know what's available. If it moves forward in a process, and if they want to move forward towards some type of resolution through the university process, then we'll have to move towards like notifying individuals that they are being alleged to be involved. That notice then creates this preliminary review, which means that on its face, if what was shared with us, we just accepted as true, we don't investigate it, we don't look into it, we just take it at its face value. If we look at that and say, well, based off of what you shared with us, that alone, if it would constitute a policy violation, then that's where it would pass our preliminary review process. When it passes our review process, there's really 2 major ways that a case can be resolved. One of them is an informal resolution or a facilitated resolution, and then the other one is the formal. So here you have information about an informal resolution in which our office works to take lead. We will work with individuals to gain a little bit of information, and then that information is going to be provided to another party, either in our office, or for students, we're going to oftentimes lean into the Office of Student Conduct to work on this informal resolution aspect of things. That informal resolution is intended to be a mutually agreed upon outcome, whatever that means for the complainant or survivor in the situation, or the respondent or alleged in the situation. We want, if there's a mutually agreed upon outcome, then that's a possibility for an informal resolution. However, they're not required to have an informal resolution, and at any point in time, a party can start the informal process and then say, listen, I don't want to continue in this. I'd rather go formal, or I'd rather not proceed forward at all. They have that option even in the midst of the informal resolution, up until a resolution is agreed upon and signed. So let's say informal resolution is not the route an individual wants to go. There may be a formal resolution route that they would like to pursue. And in that one, it's more of an investigative process. In that investigation, our office is going to reach out to individuals that are provided to us as other parties that may have relevant information. So we're gonna talk with the complainant or survivor in the process, any of their witnesses, any information that they want to provide us, whether it be emails, text messages, voice messages, Snapchat, whatever that may be, anything and everything that they want to provide to us, they can provide to us. We're going to speak with the respondent or the accused individual and any of their witnesses, going to allow them to provide any information. And then our office is going to construct an investigative report, taking all this information and compiling it together. In that process, we will allow for the parties, the complainant and the respondent, to review that information before we send that information to whom the next process would be. And so for students, we would send that information to the Office of Student Conduct for them to make a determination as to what the charges are in the Code of Student Conduct, and then proceed for a hearing process. If it's alleged that an employee has done it, then what we will do is we will take that information and we will provide that to the decision maker in the process, specifically as it relates to Title IX cases. And so there may be a hearing if it's Title IX. If it's non-Title IX, we will actually make the determination as to what that outcome looks like. But we want to make sure that we're affording opportunities for individuals to be able to not only just stop the behavior, we want to work at preventing its reoccurrence on and around our campus and with our faculty, staff, and students. And we want to address the impacts of said behavior. So that's the three-pronged approach that we will normally take. And it's not just our office alone doing it, is that we work with a team of individuals that help us, whether it be conduct, housing, cares, our BAT team, our student legal services, our counseling services, housing assist in certain areas. We bring all these individuals in to the table in order to be able to discuss what kind of resources are available with the cases that we are addressing. Lastly, and to be mindful of time, I'd like to just kind of reiterate that if anybody has any questions or would like to follow up, you can email me directly, but you can also email our Equal Opportunity at NCSU email address. You can, give us a call. Mia Embling is our program coordinator. She's the one that normally answers the phone. If you don't get her on the first ring, leave a message. She will call you right back. That is our reporting concern page. It kind of gives you some additional information. And in the face-to-face world, we're actually located on the second floor of Winslow. And so if you wanted to come up, we are limited in staff, obviously due to COVID-19. But in a time when we're not limited, individuals can even walk into our office and say, I'd like to speak with someone. If we have somebody available, we're going to get you to somebody to have those conversations in a very timely manner. So I'd like to take a pause and see if there's any additional questions before I turn it over to Pam.
David, I've got a couple questions that have come through the chat. The first is thinking about policy definitions around severe. So especially considering stalking, which is our focus today, often, showing up at somebody's apartment or place of work would not be considered severe. But we know that the cumulative fact of that happening can have a very severe impact on survivors. What are some ways that your office can address that?
As it relates to a specific definition of severe, it actually goes to severe or pervasive. And what we utilize as a baseline is that we have to utilize court decisions as to what they're providing as guidance. And so we look at case law a lot of times in order to define what severe is. And we look at the instance that's occurred on a case-by-case basis along with that guidance in order to make that determination. Again, the other piece to it, which is the individualized aspect of it, is some of it is on a case-by-case basis, that if something happened, for example, to person number one, they may not consider it severe, right, for whatever that situation is. And that would also have to be taken into account, where if the same thing happened to person number two, there may be a different perspective of that severity. And so we all, when we look at all things, we're looking at the case law, we're looking at some guidance that's provided through it, and we're looking at the impact from the individual.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question that came in is around communication and workplaces, and was hoping you could speak to some of the steps that could be done on campus if somebody feels uncomfortable in their workplace, and things like no contact orders.
Is that specifically as it relates to no contact orders related to employees or for students, or?
Either.
Okay, so when it comes to the workplace environment, some of the things, if there's individuals that aren't supposed to be in the space, that's pretty easy to address in working with employee relations if it's another employee, or with student conduct or university police if it's a non-affiliated individual or a student that's not supposed to be in or doesn't have a need to be in that area. There's times with no contact orders, or even without no contact orders, that we've had to work with individuals about how to enter a building and how to exit a building and where to go into a room and where to leave a room, kind of in the different time frames. when it's somebody that is in the space, there are times that we've worked with human resources to be able to see whether or not a space can be modified, an individual can be relocated. Is their work required to be in said space, or to see whether or not we look at job descriptions to see whether or not something's an essential job function for a person in order to see whether or not other individuals can actually do that function. So for example, if somebody is scheduled to deliver mail or packages to an office, but they have multiple people that are doing that, then and maybe that's the employee that's engaging in that behavior, then the request is, well, just have another person who's also delivering packages, have them be the ones that deliver the package as opposed to this individual, right? So there may be some modifications with UHR or with individuals that we contract with in order to make those modifications.
Thank you so much, David. We will hand it over now to our next speaker, Pam Gerace. And we will also be able to take some questions at the end, and we'll put up the contact information of all of our speakers again at the end, so you all can connect directly with their offices if you need.
Okay, I am Pam Gerace with Student Legal Services. For those that don't know, we are actually the law firm on campus for the students. As David mentioned, our office does deal with students, hence the name, the title and the name. And it is included in the student fee, which is a very nice thing for the students. They don't have to worry about going out and have to hire an attorney to handle this. It's also been mentioned several times, we are totally confidential. We have attorney-client privilege. We do not report to the university anybody that comes to see us or what you came to see us about. The same thing that applies with a law firm off campus is the same thing that applies with a law firm on campus. So hopefully that will allay anybody's concerns about coming to talk to us about that. We actually have 4 attorneys in the office. 3 of the attorneys, sadly enough or good enough, it's positive for the students, deal with domestic violence and stalking cases. And so we actually go to court with the students, which we'll talk about as I go a little bit further into the presentation. During COVID, we have 3 of the 4 attorneys are on campus every day. So our office is pretty much almost fully staffed every day. We leave it up to the students as to whether they want to come in person, they want to do a Zoom, they want to do telephone, email, whatever's comfortable for them. We're fine with students coming in the office. It's not an issue. And I will tell you, usually with our domestic violence and stalking cases, a lot of times, especially we're going to court, a lot of times we'll probably have several in-office meetings that we can work with students, not a requirement, we can work with students, but we pretty much we're pretty flexible and have enough attorneys in the office that can help with that. We do collect, and as all of us have said, all of us know each other, all of us have been dealing with these kind of situations for most of our careers and are very familiar with each of the offices on campus. We very much collaborate with everybody here, including the Women's Center and other, counseling and some of the others that didn't have the opportunity to speak. And the other thing, and I think both speakers have said this, the bottom line is it's a choice of the student. We don't want students to not come to our office because they're afraid it means they go to court, because that's not the case. It would be their choice. Our job is to explain the law, go through their options, and let them know the reality of court, because we are in court on these cases, so we can say what judges do and how they usually go. But we want to make sure that it is the student that makes the choice. So if nothing else, we want the student to come see us just so we can give them the options. And things may change, especially with these stalking cases. You think things have calmed down. We have a case right now where everything was fine. The person stopped in December, and now the person the month of January hit, and they're just texting nonstop several times a day. So as things change, it may change how we handle cases, everybody else has said too. And the next slide, which just shows where we are. And we have the email address for our office. It is confidential. And that's how most of the students, we kind of want the students to contact our office through there. They're welcome to contact me too directly, that's fine, or any of the other attorneys, but we may not be the actual one that does the case, depending on our caseload. We may have to switch it up some, but that's usually the way we get started on a case, so we can go ahead and get scheduled and everything else like that. Right now, we don't have an administrative assistant, so we kind of have to schedule it that way. We don't always have somebody live answering the phone, but we're here, and so we get back to students usually within about 24 hours, if not sooner. So we would encourage you to please do get in touch with our office, and our website is also down there. The next slide basically outlines a lot of things that we do. When we have a student come in, as both David and Kristen have said, it depends on the student and what's going on in their case as to what they may do. Right now, we have 2 stalking cases that came in this week, and we're doing cease and desist letters because that's what the student wants. Sometimes that's effective, and because nobody wants to be disruptive and go to court. It's, it's very traumatic to go to court a lot of times. It's not, and it's not something you really want to do. It's not what everybody would like to do, except attorneys. And so we may be able to stop the behaviors, to cease and desist. We have more success with that with our international students because they have a greater fear, the defendants do, or the alleged perpetrators, that there might be some immigration consequences. So we sometimes are more successful with them. Title IX, we've got a case right now where we are going to, we'll probably work with Code of Conduct on campus for them to get in touch with, or we'll get in touch directly with the Code of Conduct office at the other university. And that has a chilling effect on a lot of the defendants also. We have cases where we will talk to, if these are for situations where the perpetrator's out of state, we'll talk to the police in the jurisdiction where the defendant is, and they will, depending on the, on the office, they'll go knock on the door and have a talk. And that sometimes works dealing with the defendant. But again, it'll depend on the situation. The other things that we deal with are landlord-tenant. We have a case where we are currently facilitating the student being able to leave her lease because the boyfriend knows where she lives. So we're in the process of helping her terminate her lease, find a safe place, and we're working with the university in conjunction on that. And possibly, if you need it, just to change locks. We have landlords, if we can show them enough, that will trespass the person. Usually they don't want the liability of anything happening on the apartment complex, so they'll go ahead and trespass the defendant. We don't have this happen often, but I do have a slide, and we'll show it very quickly. But you do have protections also for employment. You shouldn't be fired because there's domestic violence, or if you need to go to court, because you will possibly have more than one court date. And so there are some employment protections for that. We are dealing right now, we just had a student that finished the application yesterday on the address confidentiality program, which is basically out of the Attorney General's office, but is actually, there's several licensed or certified programs around Raleigh and around the state that can actually process those applications. That is helpful, and we're going to be using that to help the student get out of her lease right now. And I'll have a couple slides on the criminal and civil, but we can also do criminal charges, and I'll have a list of a lot of the criminal charges we can possibly help the student pursue. With the criminal process, the district attorney's office will actually be the attorney that's involved in that particular case. We go to court with the students, even though we aren't the ADA or we're not the district attorney's office, but we don't want the student going to court by themselves. We want to be able to explain what's going on, to be able to act as interference. Can be very intimidating. So even though we aren't actually doing the case, we will be with the student when they go to court. The civil would be, and again, I'll mention that, I have a couple slides on that. The civil possibilities of things that you can do would require you to have a private attorney. Well, that's why you have us. So we will be the ones that actually go to court for you. And if there is a conflict, we have either Interact or maybe some other agencies that can help with that, or private attorneys that we know that deal with this kind of thing. But we have so many students that come here that we handle most of the cases that come in. And that also will require court, just so everybody knows. And I will explain the difference between a 50B and a 50C in a minute. And the last thing I have on this slide, one of the other big things that comes up with the stalking and DV cases, immigration. And so I mentioned we have 4 attorneys in the office. One of those attorneys solely does immigration. And there can be some immigration implications. We actually have a client right now that is in the process of getting a U visa, which will lead possibly to citizenship based on the fact that she was a victim of domestic violence. So we would be able to go over all the immigration implications and things like that. And quite truthfully, a lot of times our victims will want to know how that's going to impact the other person who also has immigration issues. They'll want to know the answers to that. And so we can answer those answers. We don't represent, obviously, the other person, but we can help with that kind of information. Next slide. Sorry. Oops. Okay. I wanted to go ahead and I put the North Carolina General Statute stalking statute up here. It may differ, and I think David was talking about that some too. It may differ with what the university definition is, and the court goes by what's in the general statutes. And Krista mentioned some of the terms that we have in here. One of the reasons I put this, I didn't put the full statute up here. I just put some parts of the statute up here. And everybody's already mentioned it requires at least 2 or more acts. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, because we see this a lot, it's directly, indirectly, or through third parties. So it's not just necessarily considered stalking if it's just the other person. If they get their best friend, or they get their father, or they get their mother, they get their ex-girlfriend or their new girlfriend to harass you, that can still be stalking. So doing it through, we have a lot of times where it's family members, getting involved with, with what's going on between the relationship. But and in the presence of, follows, monitors, and these are the exact words: surveils, observes, threatens, communicates to or about the other person, interferes with the person's property. The biggest thing we see with that, interfering with property, is stealing the cell phones. We have a case right now where the perpetrator grabbed our client's cell phone and was using that to try to trigger reactions and things like that. But so these are some pretty serious words that you can have in here for course of conduct. Harass, and I did not even begin to put everything listed in the statute down here. Any way you can imagine you can communicate, that can be harassment. Kristen brought up the word terrorizes. That is actually in the statute. So it's not just you feel like you're being terrorized. I mean, that is actually in the statute, as torment is in the statute. So stalking is very, very serious with a lot of repercussions. Reasonable person, that's come up, and that is just, reasonable person is basically from the victim's perspective. And so what may not bother one person may bother someone else, and the court, it takes it from the perspective of usually the victim. So I would not tell a person to come forward because they're very, very sensitive and it wouldn't bother their roommate, but it bothers them. And I did want to mention, so I'm glad I put this on here, substantial emotional distress, because it sounds like that was a little bit of what questions were coming from David. The statute indicates it's significant mental suffering. Now, the thing I wanted to point out, you are not required to show proof that you went to a doctor, that you got professional treatment, or that you're in counseling. And so some of the things, and I'll mention, just so you know, what we're able to do in court. It helps, and I will tell you, because of the great support system here at NC State, It's rare that we have a student that hasn't gone to counseling or hasn't gone to the Women's Center or hasn't, gone to any of the other offices they can go to. So we are able to bring that up in court, but you don't have to show a medical bill or something like that. We don't have doctors come in and testify. Examples of what we have been able to show as substantial emotional distress, and a lot of these are what Kristen had in part of her presentation. If you've changed your class schedule, if you had to change your exam schedule, I have had a client that had to change your work schedule and actually quit work. If you park your car in a different place, if you look outside your door and your window before you leave because you're checking the parking lot to see if the person is there. We bring all these things up in court. If you move, if you go, and we do bring up, if you've been to the counseling center, we actually will mention in court all the different offices that you use on campus trying to deal with this. Have you lost sleep? Do you not eat? Do you, just typical kind, and it's not typical, it can change with clients, but those are the kind of things we are able to use in court that can show substantial emotional distress. And the judges listen to that. They take notes on that. They will put that in their court orders. So they are very mindful. What we find with students is they're sometimes so used to some of the behaviors and their reactions of how to deal with the behavior and hoping it goes away, they forget how much their life has changed because of the stalking. And they downplay it because a lot of times you go, if I just don't answer, if I just leave them alone, they'll go away. And most of the time with someone that's stalking, that doesn't necessarily happen. So I see a question there. What are the protections for students who are separated but not divorced with their partner? We have that come up, pretty often. Well, no, I won't say necessarily in a separation. It depends on if there's kids and things like that. So the protections wouldn't change at all for whether you're separated. You don't have to be. You can actually go to court when you're separated, just like you can actually have a sexual assault during a marriage. You can go to court on any of these kind of behaviors that I've talked about. And so if they need housing, that's what we'll work with. If they're in a situation where they're separated, or they need to separate and they can't afford to separate because they need a place to stay, we'll work with housing. We actually will work with Interact if they need a safe place to stay. We will, and I'll talk about this. Let's go to the next slide while I'm thinking about it. And Gina, I'll keep answering your question because it does go part of the next slide too. But we can actually go to court and through the court get protections for the student. If they're separated, you can have the spouse evicted. If you end up getting an order for domestic violence or for stalking. And this is the civil part, and I'll get to the criminal in a minute. The civil 50B is actually a restraining order. So that is what protects the client from the perpetrator by removing them from the household. It will order them to no communication. It'll talk about social media. It'll talk about work. If you have kids, where they go to school, where you go to school, if you know of common places, or if you know of places that you go, you don't want them going to your church anymore or something like that, you might be able to put that in the order. We've had things where it's very specific and we've been able to put that in the order. So the court can step in, and it won't matter whether you're divorced or separated. That really won't have any effect on the different things that you can ask for. This is the civil domestic violence. I better go quick, sorry. And I have in red the part that is actually the stalking part, because that's what we're talking about. So a 50B, just so you understand, is for when there has been a relationship. And it can be a sexual assault, it can be stalking, it can be physical, assaults and that kind of thing. And if you'll notice, I have crossed out where it has the words next to persons. As of the past month, it's now been found to be unconstitutional for the court not to award a domestic violence order or stalking order because it's a person of the same sex. So that no longer is an issue. I will tell you, it is on appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court, but I don't imagine it's going to change. So this would allow, the 50B is the way we look at it, it's a restraining order that limits where the person can go and the kind of contact they can have with you if you've been able to prove stalking or domestic violence. Next slide. Sorry. This is a no contact order in court, which is different than what David was talking about on campus. This is an order which is also civil, which says if you've not had a relationship, and this definitely deals with stalking, it can deal with non-consensual sexual contact also. It's a restraining order also. It keeps the person away from you. And I've actually had this happen. It's not necessarily unusual. You've never dated the person. You were in the same class that they were in, and they just wanted to have a relationship and you didn't. And so we can possibly go to court and get an order so that they have to stay away from where you work and go to school and everything else like that. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm going a little fast because I want to leave room for everybody's questions. The other protections that we can do with landlord-tenant is if you are a victim of stalking or domestic violence, we can possibly get you out of your lease, or we can get an order in the court and order them out of your lease. There's some steps that we have to do with that, and the landlords make us have those steps. You know, just depends. I'd like to say they were really nice, and if you went to them and told them, you know, how you're in fear, that they would let you out of your lease, but that's not usually the case. Usually we get involved, and that's where we will work with other offices on campus to be able to attach safety plans and those kind of things. So we can help with some protections with that. Next slide. If you don't want to leave and the person doesn't live with you, then we can change, you know, you can possibly change locks. The statute does say you have to pay the cost of that. If the person lives with you, then the locks get changed and the person is usually removed from the home. So next slide. I just mentioned this, you're not supposed to be discriminated against. You shouldn't not be able to rent an apartment, and you shouldn't be evicted because you are the victim of domestic violence. And I've really not ever had that happen with any of my clients since I've been here. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't think it's that often. But that is something we could help you with if you felt like you were being discriminated against with that. And I do have the statute here. That does require some documentation, and I have put what that is. But that's why you come to us, so we can try to help you get that documentation so it's not an issue. Next slide. Okay. And address confidentiality. I'm mentioning this because we're starting to use this a little bit more. And that is where you have another, where you move, you don't want the person to know where you are. And that we're right in the middle of a case with that right now. We're moving the client. She's already applied for this because the ex-boyfriend knows her current address, and she is going to be moving immediately, and he won't know the new one because all public records are scrubbed. And everything goes to the Attorney General's office. That's a very simplistic way of explaining that. It's got a little more detail to that, but that does help us, and we are going to be using that to help the student get out of her particular lease because her management company will not cooperate with us. The next slide just says that you also have protections through employment. You shouldn't be fired because you have to go to court. You shouldn't be fired because you have domestic violence or anything else like that, because employers don't necessarily like you missing work all that much. And the next slide, these a whole plethora of criminal behavior that we could possibly charge the person with. What we try to have the student understand, or the client, they can do any combination. They can go to civil court, they can do criminal court, they can do Title IX, they can do any combination of those things. They could choose just to go to civil court because it's a lot quicker. They could do criminal court because they want them to have to do all these programs. There could be a lot of different ways you can go. So we look at the case and we look at the perpetrator, and then we try to hit the perpetrator with every single thing we can hit them with. So this slide and the next slide are just some of the criminal statutes that will come up with stalking and domestic violence. Notice telephone harassment, electronic communicating threats, electronic communicating harassment. So, and that is a trend, as everybody's talking about with COVID. We see the biggest the biggest thing with that was social media. One of the cases that we have now, the ex-boyfriend figured out her password and wrote a bunch of ugly stuff as if she said it. So that gets really complicated. And then the other thing I'll mention, and nobody has mentioned this yet, the other thing we see a lot of, disclosure of private images. So all of these photos that everybody took of each other, or in one case that I have right now, where they took a video consensual of having sex, it's now being used on websites where it shouldn't be used. So that's a whole nother, I won't go into that. That's a whole nother, whole nother presentation on that. But anyway, those are some of the things, the criminal things that we deal with. And then the last slide are just some resources, and I didn't put them all up. I probably needed to update that a little bit more than I have. I'm sorry. Okay, so I see one other question, stalking of students. Yes, the statute actually allows for stalking by a parent. So you can take a protective order out against your legal guardian, because that would be considered under the parent or that kind of statute. So if they are a legal guardian, and that would mean probably with papers. So I'd need to see the paperwork to make sure. You should be able to do stalking even against your parents. We've had it against parents. We've had it against students. Siblings. So it's got familiar relationships that are actually in the statute. So we should be able to help with that. We'd need to talk to the student about that, though. So I don't know if I caught, because it looked like just 2 questions. I don't know if there's any more.
I think you got them all. Thank you so much, Pam.
Sorry. Okay. Ooh, I went over time. Sorry.
No problem. We'll move on to the next slide. So first, just want to, again, thank all of our panelists today. So Krista, David, and Pam, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. The contact information for all 3 of these offices are on the slide. We will also share out contact information via email to everybody who has participated today. Next slide. And just want to remind you all that we have 2 more events coming up this afternoon. So from 2 to 3, we have a Supporting Survivors panel discussion, which is with the NC State Women's Center Survivor Advocates. So that's a chance to ask questions, get to know Women's Center staff a little bit better and what we do. And the panel from 3:30 to 4:30 is with the Movement Peer Educators, who are students who are doing prevention work at NC State. So I hope that you will be able to join us for either of those 2 presentations. Last but not least, want to just remind everyone that while this presentation talked very much about policy, legal action, and safety planning, that anybody is able to support friends or loved ones or people in your life who are experiencing stalking or any form of IPV. And these are some ways that you can help listen to them. So really being present and actively listening to anything that they tell you. Believing them, so making sure that you're not interrogating or judging if somebody comes to you and shares that something is happening, just offering unconditional support. You don't want to ask too many questions or really pry. So really, some of the main questions that you can ask is just what you can do to help, what it is that they need in that moment. You learned a lot today about resources, so connect survivors with information about resources, and then really trust their decisions on what they want to engage with. A survivor is the expert in their healing journey, so they're the ones that really know what it is that might be helpful in that moment for them. Respect. Allow them to choose what they want to share and when they share it, and really respect their privacy around that. And again, recharging, so being patient with yourself, resting, and setting healthy boundaries so that you have the energy and ability to continue to support others. A reminder that for students, the Counseling Center is a great resource that can kind of help talk through and walk through any situations that are happening, and also connect with other off-campus resources if needed. The number is 919-515-2423 to connect. The Women's Center as well has trained advocates who support survivors of any type of interpersonal violence. We're able to kind of walk through what different options are, navigating healing and recovering, and also connecting with any of the 3 offices that presented today. You can get in touch with the Women's Center through our sexual assault helpline, 919-515-4444. You can also email the Women's Center at ncsuadvocate@ncsu.edu. And we would love to hear from you about what you thought of today's presentation. The link for our evaluation will be in the chat. If you are attending more of the presentations this afternoon, please just fill out the evaluation once at the end of the day. If this is the last presentation that you will attend, if you will give us your feedback now, that would be wonderful. Again, thank you so much to Krista, David, and Pam. And we are recording this presentation, so it will be made available later. Thank you all.